Who told you to touch that piano? Those were the first words Camille heard after pouring her soul into the keys of the company lobby, spoken by the very CEO who would later watch the world rise to its feet for her music. Once silenced for daring to dream, Camille's journey from janitor to global inspiration is a breathtaking story of defiance, grace, and unshakable purpose. Watch what happens when she transforms public shame into a global movement and redefines what it means to truly be heard. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. Who gave you permission to touch that piano? The words cracked like a whip through the marbled silence of the lobby, sharp and echoing, colder than the December air seeping through the revolving glass doors. Camille flinched, her fingers freezing mid-phrase above the keys, the final note of her melody still trembling softly in the vast golden chamber like a ghost reluctant to leave. She turned slowly. There, framed by the glimmering chandelier light and the geometric shadows of polished architecture, stood him. Richard Redford, CEO of the very company she quietly cleaned each night. His suit, as always, looked more sculpted than tailored. His jaw clenched as if the very sight of her defiled the marble floor beneath his Italian leather shoes. Camille stood, instinctively brushing off the old navy blue janitor uniform that hung slightly loose on her slim frame. No one was around, and the pianos. "It's not yours," Redford cut her off, striding forward with a chilling calm. "This lobby is a multi-million-dollar face of our global headquarters. That piano is for presentation, not playtime." Camille's throat tightened, shame and heat crawling up her neck. She'd come in early like always, just to have a few stolen moments with the instrument before the first flood of executives arrived. The lobby was always empty then, just her, the hush of dawn, and the only thing that ever remembered her hands, music. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're paid to clean floors, not entertain yourself with company property." Something inside her twitched, a distant flicker, like the way a candle might protest before it's smothered. "Yes, sir." She sat down her cleaning cloth, heart sinking with it. The keys behind her, her secret solace, felt suddenly foreign. Cold, untouchable. Redford lingered for a moment longer, just enough to make the silence unbearable. Then, with the smugness of someone who'd just restored order to a world that dared show a wrinkle, he turned and marched off toward the elevator, leather soles whispering against the floor like a judge leaving the chamber. The door hissed shut behind him, and Camille stood alone. Again. That's how it always was. She wiped her palms on her uniform and forced herself to move. The piano would remain silent now, and so would she. The day unraveled in hushed voices and sideways glances. The incident hadn't gone unnoticed. A few early employees had seen the confrontation, or at least heard the raised voice, and gossip that Redford and Co. traveled like wildfire dressed in a suit and heels. By the time Camille wheeled her mop bucket into the tech lounge, she felt the weight of invisible eyes. "Did you hear?" someone whispered behind a frosted glass divider. She was playing like she owned the place. "Apparently she thinks she's some kind of prodigy. What a joke." Camille didn't flinch. She was used to being unseen, and she'd grown strong in that shadow. But this was different. They weren't mocking her for what she lacked, education, title, tailored clothes. They were mocking her for what she loved. And somehow, that cut deeper. The piano had been a relic from her other life. A different time, a different name even. Camille Laurent was once a rising star, an adopted name in newspaper clippings and whispered praise at youth competitions. She remembered how her mother used to tuck her in at night with the scent of lavender and say, "Play like the world is listening, even when no one is." But then the world did stop listening. That car accident shattered everything. Her parents, her childhood, her rhythm. Foster care swallowed her dreams like the night swallows the sun, and no one had come looking. So she stopped playing. For 10 long years, she didn't touch a piano. Not until she took this job. And found that grand black Steinway collecting dust like forgotten royalty in the lobby corner. Its bench, though always polished, rarely creaked. Until one night, months ago, she dared to sit down, and her fingers remembered. Now, she scrubbed tile like it was penance. That evening, after the rush of the day had receded into the hum of printers and the occasional tap of leftover executives, Camille stayed back, even though her shift had ended. She stared at the piano from across the room, mop resting against her shoulder. The room was still, lights dimmed to amber. The piano sat in silence, lid closed like a casket. Her hands itched, but fear held them down. She turned away. "Hey!" Camille jumped. Behind her stood a young man, mid-20s, nervous smile, an ID badge clipped to a faded hoodie. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." "It's fine," she said quickly, stepping back. "I'm Jordan. I work in digital." He glanced toward the piano. I heard you the other morning, before the yelling." She froze. "You were amazing." Camille's heart thudded. "You must have heard wrong." "No," Jordan said firmly. "I've played piano my whole life. I know what passion sounds like." She couldn't find her voice. I think people should hear you, for real." He paused. "Would it be okay if I filmed you one night? Just you playing. Nothing else." "No," she said, too fast. Then softer. "Thank you, but no." He looked disappointed but nodded. "Okay. Just if you ever change your mind." She didn't reply. He left. She stood still. Then, quietly, she whispered to the piano across the lobby, "It's safer if no one hears." But that night, she couldn't sleep. Camille sat by her apartment window, fingers twitching over her knees, her sister asleep on the pull-out couch nearby. She heard the notes in her head, notes she hadn't played in weeks. Melodies she'd written before the world asked her to forget who she was. She missed it. Not the stage, not the applause, just the feeling. That moment when your soul rises through your fingertips and the rest of the world falls away. And for a moment, just a fragile, flickering moment, she wished someone had filmed her. The next morning, Camille returned early again. She didn't sit at the piano. She didn't even look at it. But as she passed through the lobby with her cleaning cart, she noticed something, a folded note on the bench. "If music is the only place you feel free, play. The rest of us will catch up." She stared at it for a long while. Then slowly she sat down. She opened the lid, and her fingers, those forgotten wings, touched ivory once more. The melody drifted through the quiet lobby like something ancient and aching, notes floating upward as if pulled from the deepest parts of a soul too long silenced. Camille's fingers moved as if they were remembering not just music but memory. Childhood mornings filled with her mother's humming, the smell of warm oatmeal, the echo of laughter through a narrow apartment hallway. Music was never just sound for her. It was language, home, survival. But as she played in the stillness of early dawn, she didn't notice the quiet click of a phone camera lens opening from a distance, or the figure standing behind a frosted glass railing on the second floor. Jordan had returned earlier than usual, clutching a coffee he no longer cared about. He watched, transfixed, not because of the melody's technical perfection, but because of its naked vulnerability. There was something unguarded in Camille's posture, as though the song was a confession she didn't know she was giving. Jordan didn't dare move. He just listened and filmed. Just 30 seconds. No face, no name, just the hands, just the sound. Later that day, while Camille restocked paper towels in the executive restroom, the world, unbeknownst to her, had already begun to change. Jordan uploaded the clip to his personal social account under the caption, "I found beauty at work today." No one knows who she is. But this is what soul sounds like. He didn't expect much. A few likes maybe, some reposts, just a simple tribute to something pure. But by the time Camille finished her shift and boarded the bus home, the clip had already passed 50,000 views. By dinner, it was at 300,000. By midnight, over 2 million. And the comments flowed like rain. Who is she? This is better than anything on the radio. That pain, that beauty. My God. If you know who this is, tell her she saved my life tonight. Camille remained unaware. She spent her evening cooking boxed pasta for her little sister Lila, who was too tired from school to say much beyond a soft thanks. They watched half of an old movie before both fell asleep. Camille on the floor mattress, Lila curled up with a schoolbook still resting on her chest. In the morning, Camille returned to work like always. She wore the same faded sneakers and tied her hair into the same low bun. Nothing felt different, but everything was. When she stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, she noticed something strange. A few of the employees glanced up from their desks, not with the usual indifference, but with something gentler, something like recognition. "Morning," one of them said. A junior assistant, someone Camille had only ever passed without a word. Camille gave a small nod and kept moving, then another. "Hey, loved your playing." She froze. "I what?" The assistant blinked. You're the one from that video, right? The pianist? It's been everywhere." Camille's heart stalled. "What video?" 2 minutes later, in the break room, Jordan confessed everything. "I didn't mean to break your trust," he said, hands out like he was trying to stop glass from falling. "I filmed just a little. No face. Just the sound. I didn't even tag you or say where it was taken." Camille stared at the video playing on his phone. Her hands, framed in soft lobby light, moved like wings. The song, her song, was unmistakable. "That's me," she whispered. Jordan's voice lowered. "It went viral overnight. Some of the biggest music pages reposted it. People want to know who you are. They want to hear more." Camille stepped back like the words were dangerous. "No," she said quickly. No. This wasn't supposed to happen." "Why not?" "Because this job." She struggled. "It's all I have. I can't lose it. I can't risk it just because people are curious for a moment. This world isn't made for someone like me." Jordan was quiet. "I think the world just proved otherwise." But she was already shaking her head, backing toward the door, her chest tight with the sound of a rising panic. It didn't stop. By noon, the CEO had been notified. Redford burst into the marketing floor, lips pressed into a line so thin it looked like a wound. "Who authorized this?" he demanded, holding up his phone with the video still playing. "This has our logo in the background. Do you realize the implications? The liability?" The team scrambled to respond, but Jordan stepped forward. "I filmed it, sir. It wasn't branded. It was just beautiful." "Beautiful?" Redford sneered. "You think we're here to inspire poetry? We're a billion-dollar tech firm, not a piano conservatory. People loved it. I don't care what people loved. I care about control. Brand image. Professionalism." He turned sharply. "Where is the janitor?" Camille was in the storage closet when they found her. "You're wanted upstairs," the HR representative said with a stiff smile. Now, she stood, palms sweating. As she walked through the halls, she heard echoes, quiet whispers, glances. But this time, not all of them felt cruel. Some nodded softly. One woman even smiled, gently mouthing, "You're incredible." Camille didn't know what to feel. When she reached the executive boardroom, she was ushered in like a defendant on trial. Richard Redford stood at the head of the long table, arms crossed. He gestured for her to sit. "You've become a distraction," he said, drawing out the word like it tasted rotten. "This building runs on focus and discipline, and now we have news outlets calling reception, trying to interview the mystery pianist Janitor." Camille stared down at her hands. The same hands that once brought her silence were now bringing her unwanted noise. "I'm giving you a warning," Redford continued. "No more playing, no more videos, no more attention. If you want to keep your job, you'll remember your role." Camille's voice was almost too soft to hear. "My role was never meant to be forgotten." His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" She stood. Slowly, steady. "My parents used to say that music wasn't something I played. It was something I am, and for a long time I lost that part of me. I tried to survive without it, but I'm tired of apologizing for being whole." Redford scoffed. "Then maybe this isn't the right place for you." Camille didn't respond. She just turned and walked out. The hallway outside was quiet, but her heart was not. It beat with something fierce, something new, something remembered. By the end of the week, a letter arrived in her inbox. From Evelyn Chang, subject, regarding your piano performance. Camille stared at it for a long time, hands trembling. She clicked it open. "Dear Camille, I came across a video of your piano performance in the lobby of Redford & Co. The piece moved me in a way that few things have in recent years. I am a private investor in both the tech and music industries, and I believe your story is just beginning. Would you be willing to meet?" Camille read the message twice, then 3 more times. And for the first time in a very long time, she smiled, just a little. But it stayed. Camille read the email over and over again, as though it might disappear the moment she blinked. Each sentence felt unreal, dipped in something too beautiful to trust. The name, Evelyn Chang, stirred something faint in her memory. She remembered seeing it on glossy pages, connected to sleek headlines, the angel investor of sound. Backing tomorrow's voices, she turned quiet notes into gold. Camille closed her laptop and rested her hand over her heart. It was beating too fast. She glanced across the room. Lila was asleep on the sofa again, curled around a math book and an old stuffed bear that had survived every move. She was still just a child, though life had pushed her to grow up faster than it should have. Camille tiptoed to the window and opened it slightly, letting in the cool night air. She listened to the distant hum of the city and thought about how strange it was. How a life could change because of one song, and one person who dared to hear it. But she didn't reply right away. She needed time, not to decide if she wanted it, but to believe she deserved it. The next morning, Camille packed her cleaning supplies with more care than usual, each item placed neatly into her cart, like armor being arranged for a battle she hadn't named yet. She arrived early, earlier than the quietest secretaries and earliest risers. The piano sat in the far corner of the lobby, untouched since the last time her fingers had brushed its keys. She didn't go to it. Instead, she walked the length of the floor, mopped beneath the same chandelier where she'd once been shamed, and tried to breathe. That's when Jordan appeared again, this time holding a newspaper. "They printed it," he said, eyes wide. "You're on page 3. He handed it to her with a kind of reverence, as if it were a holy artifact. Camille took it with hesitation, her name in bold print above a still shot of her hands playing the piano. She didn't look at the article. Just the headline. "Mystery Janitor Pianist Captures the Soul of the City." Camille smiled weakly. "They still don't know who I am." "That won't last," Jordan replied gently. "Your story is louder than you think." She folded the paper, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "It's not my story I'm afraid of. It's what happens when they know the rest of it." Later that day, she sat alone in the tiny break room, fingers dancing nervously around her phone as she opened the email app again. And this time, she replied, "Dear Miss Chang, thank you for reaching out. I would be honored to meet with you. I've never had someone in your position say my story was just beginning. I've always felt like I missed the beginning altogether. If you're still willing, I'm ready to listen." She hit send with her eyes closed. When she opened them again, something felt lighter, as though her past had just taken a deep breath with her. The meeting was set for 2 days later, at a small private gallery just outside the city. Evelyn had reserved the entire top floor, ensuring Camille wouldn't be forced into some sterile boardroom filled with unfamiliar eyes. Camille almost didn't go. She stood at her closet the night before with nothing but uniforms and a single dark blue dress she hadn't worn since her high school graduation. It barely fit, but it zipped. That was enough. The morning of the meeting, Camille did something she hadn't done in years. She played, not for the company, not for the internet, not for the possibility of being seen. Just for herself, a single piece, something gentle, something with sorrow tucked into the middle of every chord. When she finished, she whispered into the stillness, "You're not going with me, not today." Because the truth was, Camille had always brought her pain into every room. Today, she wanted to bring her hope instead. Evelyn Chang looked nothing like the magazines. She wasn't cold or commanding or pristine in pearls. She was warm, thoughtful, her smile soft, her posture casual. Her eyes, however, were sharp as frost, eyes that saw through masks and performance and went straight to the ache beneath. "I'm so glad you came," Evelyn said, standing from the leather settee near the gallery window. She gestured for Camille to sit. "Tea?" Camille nodded, still stunned by the surreal air of the room. The walls were lined with sketches and abstract piano keys, some pressed into frames like relics from forgotten symphonies. "I don't know what to say," Camille finally admitted, voice hushed. "Then let me," Evelyn replied, pouring tea with a practiced grace. "You've moved millions of people, Camille, and you did it without a label, without a studio, without even knowing it. That's not luck. That's a gift." Camille's voice cracked as she replied, "It doesn't feel like one. Not always." Evelyn met her eyes, steady and kind. "That's how you know it is one. Real gifts come with weight, but that doesn't mean you're meant to carry it alone." The word sat in the air like a balm, seeping into every wound Camille had never named aloud. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because music has lost its heart," Evelyn answered. "People are used to perfect sounds, perfect faces, perfect stories. But yours isn't perfect, it's honest, and honesty, that's the one sound that can't be manufactured. Camille's breath caught. I want to help you record your music, Evelyn continued. Real music. Yours. We'll handle the logistics, the team, the instruments. You just bring your truth. Camille stared at her hands, the same hands that had once been told they didn't belong near piano keys. The same hands that scrubbed floors for a living, and yet, here they were. Offered a chance to speak through melody instead of mop water. I don't have money, she whispered. I don't have anything. Evelyn smiled softly. You have a song the world needs to hear. That's everything. Camille stepped out of the gallery an hour later, heart full and heavy all at once. She didn't rush home. Instead, she found herself drawn to an old park on the edge of the river, where street musicians often gathered in warmer months. There, beneath the rustling limbs of a bare tree, she saw an upright piano covered with a tarp and duct tape. It was worn, weathered, ugly even, but she sat down anyway, and she played. This time, without fear of being heard. This time, for everyone who had ever walked past a piano and thought they weren't allowed to sit. Back in her apartment, Lila threw her arms around Camille the second she walked in. I saw it, she beamed, waving her phone. You're famous. My friends can't believe it. I told them you used to make me lullabies when I had nightmares. Camille hugged her tighter than she ever had. Did you tell them, she whispered into her sister's hair, that you're the reason I kept playing? Lila pulled back, confused. Why? Because loving you gave me something to believe in again. And when I started to believe in something, music came back. Lila's eyes shimmered. And in that moment, Camille didn't care who knew her name or how many views her video had. She had already played for the most important audience of her life. The following week unfolded like a delicate dream. Camille didn't want to speak aloud for fear of waking. Mornings at the janitorial supply closet slowly gave way to afternoons inside soundproof rooms lined with velvet and warm mahogany. Camille had never been in a recording studio before, at least not as anything more than someone who vacuumed corners and emptied trash bins. But now, as she stepped into Evelyn's studio for the first time, it was her name they spoke. It was her music they waited for. The space was nothing like she'd imagined. It was quiet, not in the absence of sound, but in the way cathedrals are quiet. Gentle, expectant, sacred. The grand piano in the center of the room glowed beneath the low light, like something waiting to be touched by truth. Camille approached it slowly, her fingers trembling the way they always did before she let herself feel too much. A producer named Matteo, soft-spoken with kind eyes, guided her to the bench. No pressure, he said. We're just here to catch lightning, and from what I've heard, you bring your own storm. Camille smiled faintly, heart racing. And then, with a breath like prayer, she began to play. She didn't read from sheet music. She didn't rehearse. She closed her eyes and let the story of her life fall from her fingers. Every shadowed hallway, every whispered insult, every late night she cried herself to sleep, holding her sister's hand. The music came not in tidy verses but in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes shattering. She played until her shoulders shook, until the silence afterward felt like an echo of something sacred. Matteo, speechless, stopped the track. And Evelyn, who had slipped in halfway through, wiped a single tear from her cheek and whispered, "That wasn't a song. That was a resurrection." Camille didn't know what to say, so she didn't. Back at Redford & Co., the story unfolded in a very different tone. Richard Redford sat in his corner office, blinds half drawn, scrolling through the now viral article on Camille's journey with growing unease. His face, previously only known within boardrooms and finance pages, had been mentioned too, though not kindly. The media had referred to him as the CEO who tried to silence a symphony. He scoffed aloud. "She's just a janitor," he muttered to himself. "This whole thing is a fluke." But the investors weren't calling to ask about quarterly projections anymore. They were asking about the pianist. The board had taken notice. And more importantly, so had the press. One morning, a reporter even showed up at the front desk asking for Camille, not for him. Redford's pride, once titanium, began to crack under the weight of a truth he didn't understand. The world was changing, and no one wanted to hear from the man who tried to keep beauty in a box. They wanted to hear from the woman who let it fly. Camille kept working her night shifts at first. Not because she had to, but because she wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. There was a strange safety in sweeping the floor, in folding towels, in moving silently through a world that didn't expect anything from her. But everything had changed. Now when she entered the building, people paused. Some whispered. Some offered quiet smiles. One intern even left her a small bag of tea on her cart with a note that read, "Your music made me call my mom. Thank you." It was surreal, unreal. And yet, Camille stayed grounded, because she had Lila, and Lila was her compass. One night, after a long session at the studio, Camille found her sister waiting on the couch with their mother's old photo in her lap. "Do you think she would have been proud?" Lila asked softly. Camille knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her sister's cheek. "She was already proud, the moment you were born, the moment I played my first song. She didn't need a stage, she just needed to see that we didn't give up." Lila nodded, tears slipping down her face. "Then don't stop." "I won't." And Camille meant it. By the end of the second week, Evelyn had a proposal. "There's a gala," she said one afternoon as they sat beside the studio's long windows. "High profile, quietly charitable. People come for art, for meaning. I want you to close the evening." Camille's chest tightened. "You mean play?" "Yes, not a mystery pianist, not a silent janitor, but Camille Laurent, the artist." Camille stared out the window. "I've never performed in front of people," she whispered. "Not like that. Not since." Evelyn touched her hand gently. "Then let them see what survival looks like when it sings." It wasn't pressure, it was possibility. The night of the gala came like thunder on velvet. The ballroom shimmered with elegance, floor-length gowns, champagne towers, violins warming up near the edges of a candle-lit room. It was a world Camille never imagined stepping into, let alone standing in the center of. She wore a black dress Evelyn had tailored just for her. Simple, graceful, with long sleeves and a low back, like something from a time when music was still revered as divine. She barely recognized herself in the mirror, but Lila, who clutched her hand just before they entered the venue, looked up with wide eyes and whispered, "You look like a wish that came true." Camille's eyes burned. She kissed her sister's forehead. "That's because you believed in me before anyone else." The program rolled on. Speeches, awards, applause. Then the lights dimmed. A quiet voice introduced her. "Please welcome Camille Laurent," the soul behind the song that moved the world. And she walked forward, not as a worker, not as a ghost in someone else's story, but as herself. The piano waited. She sat, and as her fingers touched the keys, the silence of the room deepened. Not with judgment, but with reverence, she began. The song was new, written just a few days before, a melody without words, a reflection of every moment she had lived and longed and lost. It began slow, like breath returning, then deeper, richer, climbing toward something fierce and full. A crescendo of triumph dressed in tenderness. A waltz with wounds that had never fully healed, but had found a rhythm anyway. The crowd didn't move. When she finished, the room remained suspended. And then, applause. Real, rising, thunderous applause. People stood. Some cried. Others simply closed their eyes and held the moment close, as if afraid it would vanish too quickly. Camille bowed, not for their approval, but for herself. For every version of her that had once believed the world wouldn't listen. Camille had never heard silence so full before. Not the kind that hovered awkwardly or begged to be broken, but the kind that held, that wrapped around the bones of the moment and asked you to breathe slower, softer, because something sacred had just occurred. As she stepped away from the piano and made her way backstage, her hands trembled, not from nerves but from release. It felt as though she'd poured her entire soul into that grand black instrument, and now she was walking away lighter, emptied, yet not hollow, as though the music had taken something heavy and lifted it into the air above those glowing chandeliers. Backstage, Evelyn waited, tears in her eyes. "I've seen thousands of performances," she whispered, "but that was a confession." Camille smiled faintly, her cheeks damp. "It was the truth. I didn't think I'd be able to say it until now." A soft knock tapped at the dressing room door. Jordan peeked in, sheepish as ever. "Sorry, can I just—" Camille laughed and opened her arms, and he rushed into them like a little brother who had just watched his sibling fly. "You were incredible," he whispered. "Like, time stopped. Everyone felt it." "I felt it too," she murmured into his shoulder. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of being seen. But not everyone was clapping in the shadows. Back at Redford & Co., the boardroom lights burned long after most employees had gone home. Richard Redford stood in the glass-walled corner of the building, his silhouette cut sharp against the city's skyline. He was watching Camille's performance on a screen, jaw tight, arms folded. The applause in the video echoed through the speakers like a storm approaching. He pressed pause. "It's gotten out of hand," he muttered. Across from him sat two board members, both more polished than passionate, but even they couldn't deny the shift in the wind. "You do realize," said one, leaning forward, "that her performance tonight doubled our online engagement in less than 12 hours. Investors are calling her, not us," said the other. "Some of our biggest tech partners just posted her video with statements of support. This isn't going away." Redford exhaled slowly, calculating. "So what do you want me to do? Promote a janitor to company mascot?" "She's no longer a janitor," the first board member said firmly. "She's a brand, and whether you like it or not, your attempt to silence her has become the story. You need to fix that narrative." Richard's lips parted, but no words came. He looked away, jaw grinding, and watched the frozen frame of Camille on stage, head bowed, grace radiating even in stillness. He knew the truth. He was the villain in a song everyone now loved. Meanwhile, Camille stood in her apartment hours later, still wearing the black gown. She hadn't wanted to take it off, not yet. It felt like a second skin, sewn from the thread of every lost dream she thought had unraveled. Lila was asleep, curled up on the couch with a printed photo beside her. It was the one Camille had sent to be framed last week. Her standing beside the piano in the studio, smiling so faintly you'd miss it if you blinked. But her eyes were open, alive. Camille ran a hand over her sister's hair and whispered, "We're almost there." Then she opened her laptop and found her inbox overflowing. Hundreds of emails, offers, praise, invitations to play in cities she'd only ever read about in magazines. But one email stood out, not because of who it was from, but because of the subject line. Subject: "We'd like to make things right." It was from Redford & Co. She stared at it for a long time. The clock ticked louder. The room suddenly felt colder. Finally, she clicked. "Camille, we acknowledge that mistakes were made in how you were treated, and that your recent achievements have cast a new light on what our company represents. We would like to invite you back for a meeting with senior leadership to discuss potential partnership opportunities and a formal apology. We hope to move forward with mutual respect. R. Redford." She didn't know whether to laugh or close the computer. Instead, she stood at the window and watched the city, alive, glowing, unforgiving, and beautiful. Just like her music. She whispered, "Now they see me." But she didn't reply. Not yet. 2 days later, she returned, not because she owed them anything, but because she wanted to walk back through that glass building on her terms. She wore no uniform this time, just a gray coat, a soft blouse, and the confidence of someone who had learned the difference between survival and belonging. As she entered the lobby, heads turned, whispers again. But this time, it wasn't mockery. It was reverence. The same woman they once ignored now walked like a note held too long, a presence that refused to fade. When the elevator doors opened, Richard Redford was waiting inside, alone. They stood for a second in silence. He cleared his throat. "Camille." She nodded politely. "Mr. Redford." He stepped aside for her to enter first, a strange gesture, stiff and unfamiliar. As the doors closed, he spoke again. "You've caused quite the stir." "No," she replied gently. "You did. I just played a song." He glanced at her. She didn't look smug, just honest. She wasn't here to gloat. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here to stand in her own name. "You're very talented," he said finally. "No, you didn't," she said softly. "And that's the part you need to apologize for, not because I'm famous now, but because I was human then." He didn't reply. But when the doors opened to the conference floor, he simply nodded. "This way." She followed, her footsteps quiet but her presence deafening. The meeting was brief. The board offered a prepared apology, couched in vague legal language, but some of them spoke sincerely. They acknowledged what she had endured, what she had overcome. Then came the offer. A creative partnership, music events hosted at the firm, a new mentorship program for hidden talent, her name attached to the company in a way that might, in time, cleanse the stain of its past. Camille listened. She nodded. Then she smiled and said, "Thank you, but I've already built something of my own, and I don't need your name to make mine any louder." She stood, shook hands, and left. Outside, the wind met her like an old friend. She turned her face to it, eyes closed. The street hummed with noise, people, promise. But Camille no longer blended into the background, not in the way she used to. She wasn't a whisper anymore. She was a symphony. Camille hadn't expected the world to follow her out the door that day. But it did. The clip of her performance at the gala, filmed by an attendee who whispered, "She's the one the CEO humiliated," spread like fire on dry grass. Within 24 hours, it had made its way from quiet music forums to national morning shows, from radio playlists to late-night talk segments. Headlines bloomed like wildflowers across the internet. From janitor to genius, the piano story that's breaking hearts across America. She cleaned floors by day, now she's cleaning up the charts. Camille Laurent's music heals more than just silence. Every journalist wanted a quote. Every podcast wanted an interview. A well-known streaming platform requested exclusive rights to a documentary about her rise. Fashion brands reached out, sponsors, endorsements. Even a famous pop star tweeted, "She made me cry in traffic today." Camille read that one 3 times. She sat on her fire escape that night, knees pulled to her chest, eyes scanning the stars between city scaffolding. Her phone buzzed non-stop, but she let it ring. The fame was loud, louder than she had expected. But part of her was still learning how to live without flinching at her own reflection. Across the living room, Lila was asleep again, her headphones tangled, Camille's latest studio track playing softly in her ears. That made Camille smile. All of this, every headline, every call, every sold-out pre-order mattered less than the peace that now lived in her sister's sleep. Evelyn called the next morning. "Are you ready for the next step?" she asked, calm as ever. Camille leaned back in her chair, sipping tea. "That depends. What's the next step?" "A national tour." The words came out like a curtain pulled wide open. "We've had offers from 7 cities already," Evelyn continued. "Venues, press, sponsorship deals. People want to hear you live, not just through a screen." Camille hesitated. 7 cities? "To start," Evelyn replied gently, "but only if you want it, if your heart is ready." Camille looked around her tiny apartment, the chipped table, the second-hand lamp, the curtain that fluttered every time the radiator hissed. This was the place she had found safety in anonymity. But safety and growth rarely lived in the same room. "I want it," she whispered. Then louder, "I'm ready." The first city on the list was Chicago. The night before her flight, Camille found herself at the old lobby piano at Redford & Co. again. Not to perform, not for nostalgia, but to say goodbye. She arrived late, long after the office had emptied, long after the security guard had nodded her through with a knowing smile. The lights were dim, just the soft glow of the chandelier above and the distant hum of city traffic outside the high-glass windows. She touched the keys. Then she sat and she played. It was the same melody she had played the night she was first humiliated, the night Redford told her to stop. But this time, it sounded different, stronger, wiser. There was no hesitation in the way her fingers moved, no apology in the pauses. The sound filled the lobby, and somewhere deep in the building, someone listened. Redford, sitting in his office with the door cracked open, didn't move. He simply stared into the dark, the music drifting toward him like a memory he couldn't quite name. And for the first time, he didn't feel like the architect of his own empire. He felt like the footnote in someone else's. Chicago welcomed Camille with open arms and roaring applause. The concert hall was packed, not with industry elites or socialites, but with everyday people, grandmothers, students, veterans, nurses, janitors. Some held signs, others simply held each other. When the lights dimmed and Camille stepped onto the stage, wearing a floor-length ivory dress that shimmered like frost, the audience rose to their feet before she even played a note. She took her seat at the piano. Then, gently, she spoke. "I used to play where no one could hear me. I used to believe my music didn't belong anywhere except behind locked doors, between shifts and silence. But tonight, I play for every person who's ever been told they were too small to be seen." She began, and the city fell silent. Each city that followed gave her something new. In Boston, a retired teacher handed her a photo of Camille's younger self clipped from a local paper. an old recital she'd judged years ago. In Atlanta, a group of young girls from a shelter brought her handwritten letters saying, "You showed us what courage sounds like." In Seattle, a boy with a stutter hugged her after the show and whispered, "Your music speaks for me." She collected every note, every name, every glance that said thank you without a word. And she played each night like she was speaking directly into someone's deepest wound. But with each city, the schedule grew heavier. With each performance, the pressure did too. There were interviews where she had to smile through exhaustion, sponsors who asked her to wear things she didn't like, meetings where executives debated branding strategies around her pain. Some wanted her to lean into the janitor angle, others pushed her to pivot to pop ballads. "Can you write a love song next?" one producer asked. "We need a hit with radio legs." Camille sat through these conversations politely, but afterward she always found a piano and reminded herself who she was. One night, in a quiet hotel room in Denver, she got a call she hadn't expected. It was from Evelyn. "There's been an offer," she said, "from the Carnegie Foundation." Camille's heart skipped. "They're inviting you to headline a charity gala. One performance, one room. But that room, it's every major figure in the music world. Every door you've ever dreamed of will be there. And they want you." Camille didn't speak for a moment. She walked to the window where snow was beginning to fall like ash, dusting the city below. Is this everything?" Evelyn's voice softened. "It's everything people think matters. But it's not everything that is. You have to choose what kind of artist you want to be." Camille looked down at the street. A homeless man sat beneath the awning, strumming a broken guitar with frozen hands. "I'll play," she whispered. "But I'm bringing my own story. They can't have the version they want." "Good," Evelyn replied, "because the version you are is exactly why the world fell in love in the first place." The next day, Camille sat at a public piano in the Denver train station before her flight. No cameras, no press, just people passing by. She played a simple tune, one she hadn't touched since her childhood. A lullaby her mother once hummed to her in the back of a cab after a late night at work. A child nearby stopped crying. A man with weary eyes smiled for the first time in what felt like days. Camille looked up and knew fame may fill rooms, but truth fills hearts. And as long as she played from that place, she would never lose herself again. The city outside the window never stopped moving, but Camille stood still. New York had a rhythm of its own, fast, breathless, almost too loud to hear your own thoughts. But inside the penthouse suite they'd given her for the night, it was quiet. A delicate kind of quiet, one that didn't belong in a skyline like this. The soft tick of a designer clock, the rustle of silk curtains against the glass, the hum of light through dim chandeliers. Tomorrow was the Carnegie Gala, and Camille was expected to play a masterpiece. She stared at the grand piano across the room, black lacquer, gold pedals untouched. It was perfect. And in that perfection, it felt unfamiliar. Cold, even, like something that demanded rather than welcomed. She walked to it slowly, each footstep echoing like a heartbeat on tile. Then she sat, she placed her fingers on the keys, and couldn't play. It wasn't fear. She knew that feeling. This was something different, something heavier. It was the weight of expectation, of industry, of what they wanted her to be. She had been booked for a 10-minute closing performance in front of New York's elite, investors, producers, politicians, media moguls, everyone who could make or break an artist's future. The pressure had arrived not with a bang, but a whisper, 100 soft suggestions wrapped in smiles. Don't play anything too slow. Make sure you wear something that reflects your transformation. Avoid songs about struggle. Keep it uplifting. Camille had listened, nodded, smiled, and now her hands wouldn't move. She woke the next morning before the sun rose, the sky still indigo and the city still half asleep. Instead of preparing for press or rehearsal, Camille put on a simple coat, tied her hair in a loose braid, and left the hotel without telling anyone where she was going. She took the train uptown, then 2 buses, until she stood outside a modest building with cracked paint and iron gates. A shelter. The Harmony House for Girls. She stepped inside quietly. The woman at the desk looked up, surprised. "Camille Laurent?" Camille smiled gently. "I called last week. I used to live in a place like this. I was wondering if I could play something, just for them." Within 20 minutes the dining room had been cleared. A slightly out-of-tune upright piano had been rolled into the center. The audience was a dozen girls between the ages of 6 and 16, their eyes filled with stories that hadn't been told yet. Camille sat at the keys, and she played. Not a showpiece, not a radio-friendly number, just a melody she'd been writing quietly for months, about rain on windows, about waiting, about the way love sometimes hides in the smallest gestures. It was tender, unpolished, real. By the time she finished, the room was still. One girl, small, with a red scarf wrapped around her wrist like a shield, whispered, "That sounded like me." Camille looked at her. "It was you." That night, Camille returned to her suite with something she hadn't felt in days: certainty. Carnegie Hall stood like a monument to perfection. The air around it buzzed with chauffeurs, camera flashes, clipped heels on marble. Backstage, Camille was offered champagne she didn't drink, a touch-up for makeup she wasn't wearing, and a wardrobe adjustment for a gown she had chosen herself, flowing silver, modest, and utterly hers. Evelyn appeared just before the performance, eyes soft with concern. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quietly. "You're already enough." Camille met her gaze, calm and steady. "I'm not here to impress them." "Then what are you here to do?" Camille smiled. "To remember." The lights dimmed. The host stepped onto the stage, voice echoing through the historic hall. "And now, to close this unforgettable evening, a woman whose music has already changed countless lives. Please welcome Camille Laurent." A soft applause followed. Not thunderous, curious. Camille stepped onto the stage, her silver dress catching the light like stardust. She sat at the grand piano, breathed in, and didn't say a word. She began to play. The piece wasn't what they expected. It didn't open big. It wasn't triumphant. It was fragile, intimate, built on memory and longing. The kind of music that didn't scream but lingered. The kind that made people lean in. It moved like water through grief, then hope, then quiet resilience. As her fingers danced over the keys, a single tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall. And when she struck the final note, the hall remained in suspended silence. Not because they didn't know what to do, but because they felt something they hadn't in years. Then, slowly, one person stood, then another, then all of them. A standing ovation so unified it felt like thunder rolling through velvet. Camille stood. She bowed, but not for the applause. For the little girl she used to be, the one who once thought the world had no room for her music. Backstage, her phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. "I hope you know you didn't just play a concert. You rewrote history." Then one from the shelter director. "The girls are still crying. They asked if you'd come back next month. I told them you'd say yes." She replied immediately. Yes, she didn't need a PR team to approve it. Later that night, Camille sat by the piano alone, long after the crowds had gone, heels off, dress puddled around her ankles like mist. Evelyn joined her in silence, handing her a hot tea. "You changed the room," Evelyn said. Camille turned to her. "Not just the room." Evelyn nodded. "What happens now?" Camille leaned her cheek against the piano. "Now I go home, I write, I teach, I play. Not for fame, not for charts, for the girl who sat in silence for years, believing her voice didn't matter." Evelyn smiled softly. "And maybe," Camille added, "someday I'll build something that lets others play too. A space, a school, something permanent." "You will," Evelyn whispered, "and the world will be better for it." Camille closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, the future didn't scare her. It sang. Snow had started to fall in the city again, soft and quiet, like the earth was finally exhaling. Camille sat on the balcony of her apartment, her knees pulled close to her chest, watching flakes drift like scattered sheet music through the night air. The lights of the city blinked below, but up here, it felt like time had paused. It had been 2 weeks since Carnegie. 2 weeks since she played that final note, stood before a crowd of strangers, and bowed not for their applause, but for the girl inside her who had waited so long to be heard. And yet, she hadn't rushed into more. The world was still calling. Record deals, agents, interviews, but Camille had let them sit, unopened and untouched. Her team, Evelyn especially, understood. This wasn't retreat, it was reflection. And Camille needed quiet to understand what came next, not just what the world expected, but what her heart longed to build, and she knew now. It came to her one morning in a dream, just before dawn. Her mother's voice, soft and steady, humming the lullaby that had become her secret melody. But this time, Camille wasn't the child. She was the one holding someone smaller, someone scared, and she was saying, "It's your turn to play." She woke in tears and whispered aloud into the fading dark, "It's time to give it back." The first sketch was on a napkin, drawn in the corner of a quiet cafe where no one recognized her. A piano in the center, a circle of chairs around it, shelves of music, sunlight spilling through tall windows, a space that didn't just echo sound but held it. A place for those who were told they didn't belong. A place for every janitor, foster child, street musician, silent soul with symphonies locked inside. She called it the Open Key Project. By the end of the week, Camille had pitched it to Evelyn, who read the proposal in total silence, her eyes filling. "I want this," Camille said. "More than another stage. I want to make stages for people who've never even seen one." Evelyn looked up and smiled. "Then let's build a home for the unheard." It started small, just a single floor in a rundown building in the Bronx. High ceilings, water-stained tiles, cracked walls, but the acoustics were beautiful. Evelyn helped secure the lease. Mateo, her producer friend, brought in soundproofing materials. Jordan, newly promoted to a creative director role in digital storytelling, began filming the transformation for a quiet documentary they hadn't yet named. And Lila, precious, steady Lila, helped design the logo, a broken piano key split in two with a golden thread weaving it back together. "It's what you are," she told Camille. "Not perfect, but whole." The first child to walk through the door was a boy named Elijah. 8 years old, didn't speak much, had never touched a piano in his life. Camille showed him middle C, then told him, "There's no wrong note when you're being honest." He played one, then another, and when he looked up, his eyes had changed. That night, Camille went home and wept, because she finally understood. This was the standing ovation that mattered. The Open Key Project grew faster than anyone expected. Donations poured in from people who had seen her story, who remembered being silenced, who believed in a world where art could save what was broken. Musicians volunteered. Retired teachers returned. A famous cellist asked to host a masterclass. Even a former student of Camille's old conservatory reached out saying, "You've reminded me why I started playing in the first place." And as the world watched, something remarkable happened. The media tried to spin the story. Janitor becomes philanthropist, but Camille gently corrected them. "No," she said in one interview. "I was always more than my job title, and so is everyone else." The project wasn't charity, it was justice. It was remembering that genius isn't exclusive, it's often overlooked. Meanwhile, Redford & Co. was quietly struggling. After Camille declined their rebranding partnership, public perception shifted. Employees, once silent, began to speak up about the culture. Cold, hierarchical, dismissive of talent outside the expected molds. Investors started pulling back, slowly but steadily. And Redford? He watched from his corner office, unable to escape the irony that the very woman he once told to stick to mops, not Mozart, was now revolutionizing the face of music education. One afternoon, Camille received a letter, handwritten, from him. "Camille, I won't pretend I understood you back then. I didn't. I saw what I was taught to see, class, status, roles. And I was wrong. I watched your foundation's launch last week. I saw the way that boy smiled after his first song. I saw the way you looked at him, like you were passing on something sacred. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say thank you for proving me wrong." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She simply placed the letter in a folder marked "Before." Then she turned the page and kept writing the story called After. Months passed. The project now filled 2 floors. There were choirs now and strings and a small recording booth made from donated equipment. Laughter lived in the halls. So did vulnerability. Music became a second language, and children who once whispered now sang. Camille taught, mentored, sometimes just sat beside students as they tried to find their sound. She still played too, every Sunday evening in the central room, with the lights low and the doors open to anyone who wanted to listen. One evening, she looked up from the piano to find the room fuller than she expected. Journalists, neighbors, strangers. And in the back, leaning against the wall quietly, was a woman with streaks of silver in her hair and a notepad clutched in her hands. Camille kept playing. When she finished, the woman approached. "I'm a writer," she said softly. "I've been following you for a while." Camille smiled. "Everyone has, it seems." "No," the woman said. Not like this. I don't want to tell the story of your rise. I want to tell the story of your gift. Because you're not a sensation, you're a movement. Camille looked around, at the walls covered in music, at the children laughing in the hall, at Lila helping a girl adjust her fingers on the keys. She nodded. Yes, she said, let's tell that story. And so, the music continued. Not as a performance, but as a legacy. Not in concert halls or stadiums, but in living rooms, street corners, and quiet hearts, rediscovering what it meant to be heard. And in a city that once told her to stop, Camille built something that no one could silence. A home for voices that didn't come from privilege. A piano for hands that once trembled with doubt, and a song that would never end. The music room had never sounded so alive. It was late April, and golden light poured through the tall windows of the Open Key project, like it had been poured from a pitcher. Camille stood quietly in the corner, arms folded, watching Elijah, now more confident, taller, teach a new student how to read her first chord progression. Her heart swelled. This wasn't a school anymore. It was a garden, and music was growing in every child like light in the soil. But light, Camille had learned, always cast a shadow. That afternoon, as she sat at her desk finalizing the spring showcase schedule, Evelyn entered the office without knocking. Her expression was careful, too careful. Camille looked up. What is it? Evelyn handed over an envelope. This came this morning, certified mail, from the city. Camille opened it slowly, her fingers already sensing what her mind hadn't yet named. As her eyes scanned the page, her breath caught. A notice. The building was being rezoned. Their lease, valid and legally binding, was now overridden by an emergency ordinance. The block was earmarked for commercial redevelopment. They had 60 days to vacate. Her hands dropped to her lap. The letter fluttered like a falling leaf. Evelyn sat beside her. We'll fight it. You know we will. Camille said nothing. She just stared out the window, as if she could already see the bulldozers in the distance. The days that followed were filled with legal meetings and frantic phone calls. Volunteers rallied, supporters donated. But bureaucracy, Camille discovered, had its own tempo. Slow where it mattered, swift where it hurt. It's political, Evelyn said over coffee one morning, exhaustion in her voice. The city wants tech firms in this corridor. The land is more profitable without music. Camille folded the notice neatly and set it aside. They think this is just a building, she murmured. They don't know this is breath. Evelyn met her eyes. Then show them. Camille went to work, not with rage but with resolve. She wrote an open letter, not to the mayor, not to investors, to the people, to the community. We are not just children and chords and broken pianos. We are what happens when the forgotten become heard. We are the harmony in the noise, and we will not be moved, not because we are stubborn, but because we are rooted. The letter was published by 3 major newspapers within 24 hours. A well-known actress posted it on her Instagram with the caption, "The world needs more of this." A famous composer offered to host a benefit concert. Donations flooded in, and so did the cameras. Reporters came, protesters gathered. The students painted signs that read, "We are the music," and marched in their uniforms down the sidewalk in perfect rhythm. But the city held firm. Zoning laws, they said. Economic necessity. Camille knew what it really was. Power, not listening. One evening, as the legal battle deepened and the media coverage swelled, Camille sat at the old upright piano tucked in the corner of the second-floor hallway. She didn't play, she just sat. Lila joined her silently, resting her head on Camille's shoulder. "Are we gonna lose it?" Lila asked. Camille didn't answer right away. She touched one of the keys. Middle C. The first note Elijah ever played. "I don't know," she said, and the truth settled between them like dusk. But the community refused to let go. One Saturday afternoon, dozens of students and volunteers staged a performance right in front of City Hall. They brought their instruments, their voices, their stories. People walked by, stopped, listened. Some cried. Camille stood back, in a hoodie and jeans, unnoticed by most. A little girl, no older than 7, sat at the portable keyboard and played a simplified version of Camille's most famous piece. At the final note, she turned to the crowd and said, "I was scared of my voice, until Miss Camille told me that music doesn't care how much money you have." The crowd erupted. The mayor's office released a statement that night. They were reviewing options. But hope? Camille had learned, doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it's paper thin. 2 days later, the court denied the injunction. They had 35 days left. The team gathered in the main room. Staff, teachers, students, volunteers. Camille stood before them, her voice clear but gentle. "They're taking the building," she said, "but they can't take this." She touched her chest. "What we built here, what you built, is bigger than walls." There were tears, but no silence. One teacher raised her hand. "Then where do we go?" Camille looked around the room, at the cracked floors, the uneven walls, the piano with its chipped keys, and she realized something. They hadn't been drawn to this building. They had been drawn to her story, her music, her belief that everyone, no matter where they began, deserved to play their song. That night, Camille sat by her window again, the city stretching out in blinking constellations. She took out her notebook and began to write. Not lyrics, not melodies. A blueprint. She would rebuild, not one center, many. Mobile programs, partnerships, pop-up music clinics in schools, shelters, prisons. Music no longer trapped by walls. Music that traveled. Music that found the lonely. She would call it the second verse. Because sometimes the most beautiful part of the song is the one that follows the silence. 35 days later, they locked the doors to the Open Key Project's original home. The city sent trucks. Workers arrived, but so did Camille, with every student and a piano. They played as the keys turned, played as the signs were taken down, played as the building faded behind them. And when it was done, Camille stood at the curb, held her sister's hand, and whispered, "Let's go make more music." The map on Camille's wall no longer marked borders, it told a story. Red pins for every school that had requested a workshop. Gold ones for shelters where her students had returned to teach. Blue ones where pop-up concerts were scheduled in the coming months. And right in the center, circled in ink like a promise, was a small dot labeled Eden Hill. The town where she was born, the place where music first found her hands, and the place she had never dared return to. Until now, the second verse foundation had grown into something no zoning law could threaten. Within 6 months of losing their original building, Camille and her team had launched 6 mobile piano programs and trained over 100 volunteers. The goal was never just to rebuild a music school, it was to rewrite the meaning of who music was for. One day, while sorting through emails, Camille found a message from a woman named Diane Norwood. "I'm the new principal at Eden Hill Elementary. I found an old VHS tape of you playing piano at age 9. It moved me to tears. We've lost our music program due to funding cuts. But if there's any chance you'd come home." Camille didn't hesitate. She booked the flight the next day. Eden Hill looked smaller than she remembered. The diner on the corner was still there, with its cracked neon sign that flickered at dusk. The houses had chipped paint and familiar porches. The air smelled like earth and wood smoke, just as it had when her parents used to walk her home hand in hand, laughing over inside jokes she'd never fully understood. She stood outside her childhood house for a long time. The new owners had painted it pale green. The swing her father built was gone, but she swore she could still hear its creak in the wind. She didn't knock. Some places you didn't re-enter with feet, you re-entered with heart. The next morning, she arrived at Eden Hill Elementary in jeans, a gray sweater, and a piano charm necklace Lila had made for her the day before she left. She carried nothing but her story and the courage it had taken years to grow. Principal Norwood greeted her at the entrance. "They don't know you're coming," she said with a wink. "We told them it was just an assembly." The children filed into the auditorium, restless and chattering. Some dragged their feet, others looked half asleep. The room still had the same creaky floors, the same green-painted stage. Camille stood in the wings and watched. A battered upright piano sat center stage, keys yellowed with time. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real. When her name was finally called, she stepped into the light. There were no lights flashing, no orchestra. Just her. And the quiet. "Hi," she said, her voice steady. "My name is Camille Laurent. Some of you might not know me. But I sat in the same chairs you're sitting in now. I walked these hallways. I ate those cafeteria mashed potatoes." A few students chuckled. "I was a foster kid," she continued. "I was quiet. I was scared. But one day someone let me sit at this piano, and they didn't tell me to stop. They just listened. And for the first time, I felt like I mattered." She sat down at the keys. Today, I want you to feel that too. And she played. It wasn't her most famous piece. It wasn't even one she'd shared publicly. It was the lullaby her mother used to hum, the one that had lived with her longer than any address, any paycheck, any performance. And as she played, the room shifted. Students leaned forward. Teachers went still. One little boy in the front row took off his headphones and listened, wide-eyed. When she finished, there was no immediate applause, just breath. Then one child stood, then another, then all of them. Not clapping, just standing, like they understood that what they'd just heard wasn't for entertainment, it was for them. Afterward, children lined up to ask questions. How long did it take to learn piano? Did you really get kicked out of your job for playing? Can I be like you, even if I don't have a piano? Camille knelt in front of the last one and took her hand. You don't need a piano to be heard. You just need to believe that your voice matters. And with the help of the second verse, that school got a music room again. New instruments, weekly workshops, and Camille, she returned every month. Not because the press followed her, but because that little school had once held her voice when the world didn't want to. Back in New York, the open key community had never been stronger. Though their original building was gone, the spirit was more alive than ever. Every time Camille returned to a different city, a different town, a different child, she wasn't just teaching music, she was planting hope. A seed in the soil of every soul that had been told they weren't enough, and every seed bloomed. 1 year after the gala at Carnegie, Camille stood on that same stage again, not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker for a global music education summit. She wore no gown, just the same gray sweater and a soft smile. Her final words echoed through the hall like the last note of a perfect chord. I used to think music saved me, but it didn't. You did. The listeners, the believers, the broken and the brave. Music just gave me the language to say, I'm still here. And now, I'm here, so others don't have to wait as long to be heard. She bowed, not to impress, but to thank, because the janitor they once silenced had built a symphony that could never be stopped. To anyone who's ever been told to stay in their place, let Camille's story remind you, your place is wherever your truth leads you. She was a janitor with calloused hands and a soul full of music, silenced not because she lacked talent, but because the world couldn't see beyond her uniform. But she chose not to let shame define her sound. And when she finally played, not even the walls built to contain her could withstand the power of her purpose. The key life lesson here? Your gift is not measured by who sees it. It's measured by whether you dare to share it anyway. Camille didn't chase stages. She built them. For the unheard, for the overlooked, for every child who dreams in silence. And when they tried to take her space, she turned her vision into a movement. You don't need permission to rise. You don't need applause to begin. What you need is courage to play the first note, and the faith that someone somewhere is ready to listen. Keep creating, keep believing, and when the world tells you to be quiet, play louder.